Hey y'all, Game Methuselah. I've been sort of a funk this last couple of weeks, and I want to thank Gabe and Rod, who are bringing you this episode. They're bringing it to you because I have been just concentrating on world events right now, and unfortunately being a game master and historian, I seem to have a real perspective, I think, on where things are going. Sadly, sometimes more as a game master, but mostly obviously because of the history of a lot of these things going on and how I think they're going to go. Now, I don't want to bore you to death, and I'm sure Gabe and Rob don't either. So I thought what I would do is, at the end of this video, start to give you some of what that information is. And if you're interested, hang around. But likely it's not going to be what you think it is, because it's not about local politics. It's kind of world events and what I see in history and what I see repeating itself in history now. So at the end of it, I'll talk to you guys about it if you're interested, and if people want to talk, they can send me comments on it, and if it's interesting, maybe I'll continue on in the future. But if nothing else, you can be sort of as depressed as I am looking at world events. But really on to the more important things, which is the real love of my life, which is gaming and painting. And what I wanted to talk to you about was like the gimmicks and things. Thought I would start with something that I really, really like, and it seriously needs to be reprinted. This is Battle Systems. TSR, this is second edition. This was 1989. The original Battle Systems was in 85, and then they updated it. It was a box set. Then they updated it and made it into this booklet and sort of made it towards more of the modern rules. It was a really good system. I sort of thought it was a response to the 1980s Warhammer craze starting, but I'm not completely sure. It's a lot like Warhammer in some ways, for those of you who have played, but I think it's better. I got a lot of my friends who role-played and did miniature games who didn't necessarily care for Warhammer and would play this. And of course, being the rules guy I always am, I kept modifying these rules a little bit to suit myself. But the thing I wanted to talk to you about, and what I think should happen, is people should bug TSR to redo this. And the reason I think it needs to be redone is something that I did, and I think Matt Colville is attempting to do, and will likely successfully do, because I'm sure we must have had this conversation in our 20-some-odd years, about the idea of the way I used to love to run some campaigns. Now, it only works with a few people, but you can really bring more in if you're more creative. And I got to be more creative as time went on, but it is time consuming, and it's not going to be for everybody in your group. And the idea is, you start with your great overview of a campaign, like Albion, where you have a world map and you've got all this stuff going on. And then you can run Battle System. Now, Battle System would all be your large army battles. So whenever armies get together to fight, you have the battle system. And what needed to happen in that, what I was able to modify quite a bit, was ways to get the characters and their unique magical items, levels, and abilities into battle system. They threw some heroes in there, and they said this is sort of how they affect battles, but they didn't get too much in depth to it. Now, I'm guessing that battle system fell the wayside because not a lot of people were necessarily playing miniature battles back in the 80s. It was really new, and Warhammer was the thing that really sort of pushed that craze. I will bet you now that, well, nearly 40 years, well, at least 30 some odd, 40 years later, there are a lot more people who have large collections of various miniatures, and it would be something fun to do to be able to allow your characters to both have battles that might set the stage for running your campaigns, and then have heroes do what they do, which is run in the D&D adventures. Then from that point on, maybe become minor commanders and lead units into battle in a large battle system that might be run by one player, and other players can either be there to make die rolls for their heroes or be sort of involved with individual units. Now, Matt did good on this, I think, when he was doing with his battle system, with the idea that he had armies plus the individual stuff, and that works because you kind of want that Star Wars feel where they used to always run, and they kind of still do in all their movies, a kind of gimmick or thematic where they have like the battle at Endor and battle at Hoth and all the other battles where you basically had individuals fighting individuals. So where Luke Skywalker fights his father, Darth Vader, and the Emperor on the new Death Star, and then below on the planet, Han Solo and Leia are trying to break in to put down the shield so that the great fleet battle could occur up in the space. So you have three adventures kind of running simultaneously. One massive space battle, one semi-massive ground battle, and then individual running Dungeons and Dragons-esque type mano a mano type fight. And that's a really nice thematic for your players where they can see more of it. Now, ideally, we had a situation where Don and I had worked with the idea of putting like a Great Albion map on the wall where the units could move. As the units move, we would have battles. The battles could then be played on the board if there was limited time, or we could set it up as a miniature battle using battle system. And we started to use battle system to that effect, and it worked really well. But of course, there's a lot of effort there. And many decades ago, other than us, there were not a lot of people who had large collections of painted fantasy armies. Not the case now. There are a lot of them available. And even more importantly, there's a lot of them that you can acquire on eBay, and often for substantially less than even basic lead cost. So I started putting up some miniatures just for sale individually, and Rob and Gabe both bought some. But what really motivated me to get back out and do more videos, of course, was the nice things they said about me, both directly to me and online, about how much my stuff means. And sometimes I think when you're doing videos and you're alone in a room, or a set, or you're doing whatever you're doing, you don't feel like what you're doing might be valuable or interesting to people, and maybe that it's just getting redundant to things you've talked about. But the good words and stuff get me to motivate me to keep talking to people who I know are out there who are looking to expand their campaign. And I think this would be something that would be very interesting to consider, because what it allows you to do is run more integrated campaigns instead of a lot of the stuff you see where it's really just a glorified role-playing campaign, and you really don't get a finale of sort of a large battle and how it comes to pass and how that might change the geopolitical way that the game is going. If you think about this, it's a nice way to add something new to your game. Now, not everybody's going to do this, and a lot of people are not going to want to do it. But the few times I did do it and did it well, I would find that people who were necessarily playing in the game, who might have had some interest in painting miniatures, would maybe paint their heroes and bring some units and troops, and they would be more than willing to come and be part and parcel a larger event that you as a game master could put together and run. And of course, you get the advantage in your case of running all the evils, unless you're like Matt, who's kind of smart, where he gets other people to do the dirty work for him. And well, that works out as well. But when you are building your collections, the best idea is to think of this as a long-term process. Now, sometimes I don't, and that may be why I have 15 or 20 monsters that you're never going to use all at once. I mean, how many wyverns can you put on the battlefield? But if it had an army situation, and you had a situation where you could maybe even go attack dragons, and instead of just being 5 or 6 heroes that go up there and have to individually fight this dragon, why not take a small army? See if you can beat the dragon with a massive force led by 2 or 3 big heroes. And I think that would be something that would be interesting and fun to do. This didn't get done much, and usually the reason was time. I mean, people usually aren't willing to dedicate the time for the battle, the time for the skirmish, the time for the role playing. They just want to get together, role play, kill monsters, get the treasure, and go on home. But I think it's something to think about. And if nothing else, I really think that this is something that Wizards should really consider doing, is reintroducing a battle system like this for their current 5th, or even if they're pushing 6th and looking to get to that. So I wanted you to think about it. I wanted you to look about it. I want to get some feedback on what, if any, if you've ever done that. I know that when I talked to Barker, he told me his group was doing that all the time. And you have to remember, Dungeons and Dragons, the original 1975 D&D, was all based upon chainmail, which was the rule system they were using to run their army battles. And that's how all of role-playing started, was a need to expand upon the army battles and make them more interesting so that heroes in it could be something real and tangible and something that you could touch. It's a nice add-on to a campaign that is well developed and has a lot of miniature painters in it. I think I'm going to put a lot more miniatures up for sale. Not so much that I'm willing to necessarily part with them all, because I'm never going to, but the fact that I have thousands of painted miniatures, as you guys know, and many thousands of unpainted miniatures. And I have to make a judgment at some point that I have substantially less time in front of me than I have had behind me, and I'm not likely going to get to all these. And some things I'm never going to use again. I have to make lock and stock of certain games that I might have loved and may still love, but I don't have anybody to play it with. They've been sitting there for a decade in a box, beautifully waiting for somebody to love them and play with them. So I might sell epic 40K armies that I have painted and epic 40K armies that I have unpainted. Lots of role-playing units that, even though they were great as 30 pikemen, I don't necessarily think people need 30 pikemen, but they might like to get 5 or 6 individual figures to use for a town guard in their Dungeons & Dragons games. And I think that's going to be fun. So I want to keep doing that. Not so much that it generates a whole lot of money, because it kind of really doesn't, but the fact that it's nice now to get the stuff out in the hands of people who will love it and will use it. And seeing that Rod has painted a lot of the miniatures, old school miniatures I gave him, really excited me. And I'm pleased to see that. And I'm pleased to think that that might be expanding the hobby, which has always been my goal, to get more people into playing, to get more people into thinking about the game and finding better ways to play it. And if it isn't me producing it, and of course it's likely not going to be me, it's nice to know there's people out there who are always thinking about ways to improve the role-playing games and all games. We live in a gaming renaissance, as it's been said to me by some of my friends, and it's true. There's so much good gaming out there right now that makes the 70s look kind of sad. There were some great games in the 70s, and I love to talk about them. So anyway, until we have a chance to speak again, fight me devils, fight, for I hate peace. For all you who want to hang on, I'll talk to you about it. What basically is going on is, being Americans, we tend to be somewhat narcissistic. So we keep looking at our own internal problems and thinking that they are monumental and tremendous and all this thing. And as I pointed out at the beginning of the video, John Brown's body lies a moldering in the grave. We've been in substantially worse situations in our country than we are now, internally. The problem is always external. And what I see going on externally is something that really reminds me of World War II and World War I, and in many cases, all wars. The miscalculations that happen in situations where people are trying to acquire more power, control, wealth, space, or if they're maybe just megalomaniacs or psychopaths, and they've got this whole concept that they want to be who knows what. And this often looks like World War II, and I'll just use World War II because it's an easy example. I thought that Hong Kong and the Uyghurs was like Nazi Germany invading the Sudetenland. And now I worry that Taiwan is Czechoslovakia. You know, Hitler invaded the Sudetenland, later Austria, and nobody said anything. I mean, they all bitched and whined and complained. He said, oh, gee, sorry, that they're mostly Germans there, so we're just going to take that and be done with it. Then, of course, he took over all of Czechoslovakia. And they didn't have any alliances with other countries to mutually protect them, which was the whole concept of NATO after World War I and II. It was the idea that we would have these groups that would prevent these major wars, because we would say that attack on one is an attack on many. The Chinese want Taiwan back. What worries me is the miscalculation. What's being said is scary. Now, Taiwan is not part of NATO. It does have mutually defense agreements, I think, with about 10 or 11 of NATO allies, but it's not a NATO participant. And that's an issue. Now, the Chinese have been sort of pushing, poking the bear, pushing, and looking at this situation. And I worry that Taiwan is Poland. And what happened was, obviously Nazi Germany, after not seeing any arguments before, rolled into Poland. And of course the Russians jumped on because they made an agreement with the Russians to get them to help out and to obviously not attack them. You can have half of Poland and we'll take the other half and life will be great. And no one's going to do anything. And that kind of was true. The British and France had alliance with Poland and they declared war. But they didn't do anything because it was Poland. I mean, the French didn't want to get into a war after the horrors of the First World War they suffered. Britain really didn't want to get into a war, but they were obligated to do so. So the great miscalculation was starting to already form. Germany sees nothing, done. it gets hold of Poland, and the Sitzkrieg starts, where basically months pass and nobody does anything. They just sit there and they stare at each other. And we're at war, and oh, that's horrible, and you're bad people. But nobody's doing anything about it. And it's a pretty horrible time. But people look the other way, because what you saw from Germany, Nazi Germany, and Hitler's desire for more growing room was that they realized, well, we're at war with France, and the window is closing. France is starting to build up, get motivated. England is starting to get built up, motivated, putting out, more of a direct navy, getting ready to deal with it. And the Germans didn't really have a navy, so they were using their submarines to obviously try to starve England out. And France folded like a cup. So now you have a major country, a major European country, folding up like a cup. Now, Germany says, hey, England, hey, look, we're done. Let's have peace. And, Winston Churchill kind of flips him the bird and says, no way. And that sort of situation lands because, of course, England hopes that they can get the United States into the war. Because if they can get the United States into the war, it's a different thing. And Battle of Britain, all that stuff, it gets pretty scary. Well, Japan bombs Pearl Harbor, America goes, now we're at war, and Germany declares war on the United States, which was another huge miscalculation. And those are the things you guys all know from history. But what worries me is as we watch it today, what is going to happen? Is the miscalculation that I potentially see where China goes, well, hey, Taiwan's not going to be a big deal. It's a 100-mile jaunt across the ocean. By the time we wipe them out, it's not even going to it'll be tomorrow's news. And will anybody want to come to fight? My guess is not really. And surely after the other day when our president basically said the China first process in this area, we respect, but we want to keep the status quo. It sounds kind of wishy-washy, like the old sort of Chamberlain peace in our time thing. And I think that scares me because they could make a mistake. China could make a mistake. And we could all be dragged into a really hideous war. And what we learned from World War II and everything else, civilians, they're all legal targets now. But I don't want to wake up to an EMP that knocks out the electrical thing so I can't play my computer game or watch Netflix, or makes it so we have no electricity, our refrigerators are off, and food riots. I mean, you can understand all the horrors that would come to play with the start of just a few things happening in our country. Now, I hope none of this is going to happen. I really do. The problem is, half a century of studying history, almost that same tired of time being a DM and playing and making my own history, worries me that invariably in times there tends to be these miscalculations. And I worry we're going to have one now. So now you guys can all be up thinking and not getting any sleep like me, wondering how this is going to fare. But hopefully it will all work out in the wash and cooler heads will prevail. We'll see. But I just want to tell you, I'm going to try to stay focused on gaming and hopefully keep my brain away from all of this craziness that's going on in our world right now. And hopefully it'll all weather itself out. So have fun. Enjoy the rest of the week. Sorry to have dump this load on you. Hopefully you've turned it off by now and you're not watching it. But remember, the important things, game and paint on. See you guys later.